Mind your own business, just like your mother should. That's what my mother said to my 9-year-old daughter as she shoved her to the floor of my workshop on New Year's Eve. Maeve landed on the concrete among the splinters of furniture that my brother had just finished destroying. The security camera caught it all. Time-stamped. 11:52 p.m. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood in the middle of my destroyed workshop on New Year's morning and watched the footage for the second time on the monitor mounted above my filing cabinet. The timestamp glowed green in the corner of the screen, my daughter's body hitting the floor. My mother's hand still extended, the chemical smell of spilled restoration finish hung in the air around me, mixing with sawdust and something sharper, the raw, exposed grain of wood that had been whole 12 hours earlier. I played it back one more time, not because I needed to see it again, because I needed to be certain of what I already knew. Let me go back to the beginning so you understand exactly how we got here. I'm Lenore Stratton. I'm 37 years old, divorced. My ex-husband, James Cooper, left when our daughter Maeve was 2. He moved to Portland, Oregon, and hasn't had meaningful contact in 7 years. I have sole, legal, and physical custody. He plays no part in this story. I went back to my maiden name the day the divorce was finalized. What I do, what I've done for 10 years, is restore furniture. Pre-1900 American hardwood pieces. I own and operate Stratton Workshop out of a converted barn in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. I built it from nothing. No family money, no startup loan from my parents, no investor, just me, my hands, and clients who trusted me. With pieces that were older than anyone alive in their families, annual gross revenue last year was $182,000. I employ 2 part-time assistants. I work primarily on commission-based restorations. People bring me broken things and I make them whole again. That's the simplest way to describe it. My parents, Harold and Deb Stratton, have never described it that simply. To them, my workshop was a hobby, a phase, a waste of whatever education they believed I should have pursued instead. My father is 67, retired, deliberate in everything he does, including his disappointment. My mother is 65. She manages appearances, smooths over incidents, reframes cruelty as misunderstanding, makes sure the Christmas photos look normal. And then there's Curtis, my younger brother, 33, 4 years younger than me. Curtis works, or worked, depending on when you're counting, as a regional sales representative for a mid-tier commercial flooring company, the kind of job that produces a lot of LinkedIn titles and not a lot of income. But Curtis had a leased Audi, a 2-bedroom apartment in Rochester, a gym membership, meal kit subscriptions rotating through his door every week. You want to know how he afforded all of that? I'll tell you exactly how. 6 years ago, when I was 31 and Curtis was 27, my father sat me down at the kitchen table during a Sunday dinner. He didn't ask. Harold Stratton doesn't ask. He presented it as a fact. Curtis was building his client base. Curtis needed time to establish himself. Family helps family. That's what families do for each other. He wanted me to send Curtis $1,350 every month. I said yes. I don't know why I said yes. That's not true. I know exactly why. Because I'd spent my entire life trying to earn something from that table that was never going to be offered, and saying yes was easier than hearing what Harold would say if I said no. So I sent it. $1,350 on the first of every month. I never missed a payment. Not once in 6 years. 72 months. I did the math sitting at my kitchen table on New Year's morning, the footage still looping on the workshop monitor behind me. $1,350 times 72 months, $97,200, $97,200, sent to a man who leased a car he couldn't afford, who ate meals delivered to his door, who changed his LinkedIn title every 4 months, regional account executive, territory development lead, strategic client liaison. While I was up at 5 in the morning, hand-planing walnut boards for clients who trusted me with pieces their great-grandmothers had eaten dinner on. While I was doing that, Harold was telling extended family that Curtis was really finding his footing, that his sales territory was expanding, that he had real potential. Nobody ever asked about my workshop. Nobody except one person. Ruth Stratton, my grandmother, Harold's mother. She died 3 years ago at 84. Ruthie was a collector. Pre-1900 American furniture, the same pieces I'd built my entire business around. She's the reason I fell in love with wood in the first place. When I was building out the workshop 10 years ago, hanging lights in a barn that smelled like old hay and motor oil, framing out the workbenches with lumber I'd sourced myself, Ruthie drove out twice. She was the only family member who came. She was 74 then, and she walked the entire space, running her hand along the doorframe I'd planed myself. She stopped at a chair I'd just finished, a ladder back with a replaced spindle I turned on a second-hand lathe. She looked at the joinery for a long time. Then she looked at me. "You have the hands for this," she said. That was it. She didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. It was the only time anyone in my family acknowledged what I was building as something real. Nobody else was there. Harold didn't come. Deb didn't come. Curtis didn't come. Just Ruthie, standing in my workshop, seeing something that no one else in the family bothered to look at. When Ruthie died 3 years ago, the family produced a will, formally executed, or so they said. It distributed her trust assets, $340,000 in real property proceeds and invested assets, roughly 60-40 between Harold and Curtis. Harold stood to receive approximately $204,000. Curtis, approximately $136,000. I received nothing. I didn't contest it. I attended the funeral. I said very little. I went home and sanded a tabletop until my arms ached, and then I put Maeve to bed and sat in the kitchen in the dark. That's what I did. That's what I always did. I absorbed it, and I kept working. 7 years ago, before she died, Ruthie had her writing desk brought to my workshop. A Federal Period secretary desk, approximately 1807, American hardwood. Gorgeous bones, but the frame needed structural work. I did an evaluation. During the assessment, I noted a hidden compartment, common in pieces from that era, but I didn't open it. Ruthie was still living. It was her desk. I noted it in my intake sheet and moved on. 6 months before New Year's Eve, the writing desk came back to my workshop for full structural restoration. I began the work in October. In November, during the frame disassembly, I identified the hidden compartment again. I set the discovery aside. I was focused on the restoration itself, stabilizing the frame, matching the wood grain for a replacement panel. The compartment could wait. I had client deadlines. Then came New Year's Eve. 18 months before that night, someone had tried to force the side door of my workshop. The handle was damaged. No entry was achieved. I didn't report it to police because I had no evidence of who it was. I had my suspicions. Instead, I installed a 4-camera security system, interior and exterior coverage, continuous recording, time-stamped. It cost $2,100. I paid for it myself, like everything else. On New Year's Eve, at approximately 11:40 p.m., my brother Curtis forced open the side window of my workshop, the same side of the building where the door had been forced 18 months earlier. The security cameras recorded him entering. They recorded what he did next. He was systematic. Not drunk, not reckless. Systematic. He moved through the workbenches and destroyed what was on them, piece by piece. Dorothy Allen's 1880s cherry sideboard. Dorothy is 71, a retired schoolteacher from Canandaigua. She'd trusted me with that sideboard for 8 months of restoration work. Pre-restoration value, $8,400. A pair of matching Victorian parlor chairs from an estate client. Value, $6,200. An 1890s walnut secretary desk from a private client. Value, $7,700. Miscellaneous smaller pieces and hardware components in various stages of restoration. Value, $8,700. And Ruthie's writing desk, the Federal Period Secretary, 1807. The piece I'd been restoring for months. Total, $31,000 in destroyed client pieces, all documented, all under active contracts with intake sheets, repair logs, and client agreements in my filing cabinet 10 feet from where Curtis was swinging. At 11:52 p.m., Maeve heard the noise. Her room is above the workshop. She came downstairs in her pajamas, barefoot, crying before she even reached the bottom step because she could hear wood breaking and she knew what that sound meant. She'd grown up in that workshop. She knew the names of wood grains before she could read chapter books. She knew what destruction sounded like. Deb was in the doorway. My mother had been waiting in the driveway and had followed Curtis inside. She was standing in the workshop entrance when Maeve appeared. My daughter was crying. My daughter was in her way. Deb found both facts annoying. She shoved Maeve to the floor. Not a redirect, not a hand on the shoulder, a shove downward. My 9-year-old daughter hit the concrete floor of my workshop, and my mother stood over her and hissed those words. "Mind your own business, just like your mother should." The camera captured it. All 4 angles, time-stamped. 11:52 p.m. I found the damage at 6 a.m. on New Year's Day. Maeve was asleep upstairs again by then. She'd cried herself out on the workshop stairs while I held her, and I'd carried her back to bed. I walked through the workshop in the gray morning light, sawdust everywhere, the chemical smell of spilled finish, splintered wood on every surface. I stood in the middle of it for a long time. Then I sat down at my workbench, the one surface Curtis hadn't reached, and I pulled up the security footage on the monitor. I watched it once. I watched my brother break my client's trust, piece by piece. I watched my mother put her hands on my daughter. I watched it a second time. Something inside me shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a joint separating from a mortise. No sound, just the sudden absence of connection where connection used to be. I was done pretending this was family. That night, after I'd photographed every inch of the damage, Maeve sat on the workshop stairs in her pajamas. She was watching me work. She'd been quiet all day, too quiet for a 9-year-old. Her voice was small, cracked right down the middle. Did Grandma Deb push me because she doesn't like me? I set the camera down. I sat next to her on the stairs. I put my arm around her, and I didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't cry in front of her, but I held her so tight my arms shook. At 8:14 a.m. on New Year's Day, I picked up my phone and called Margaret Collins. Margaret is my attorney, general practice, strong in estate and family law, based in Geneva, New York. I'd retained her 3 years earlier for a client contract dispute that never went to court. She's efficient, unhurried, and has no interest in drama. When she answered, I didn't describe my destroyed furniture first. I described what happened to my daughter. Margaret arrived at the workshop by 10 that morning. She didn't say much. She walked through the damage the way I walk through a piece before restoration. Slowly, noting everything, touching nothing. She spent 40 minutes with the security footage. She watched it twice, then a third time, pausing at specific timestamps. She wrote down 6 numbers on a legal pad and circled 2 of them. One was 1140, the other was 1152. When she was done, she set the pad on my workbench and looked at me. You have everything, she said. I knew that. I'd known it since 6 a.m. On January 3rd, Curtis filed a police report accusing me of staging the break-in for an insurance payout. He walked into the local precinct and told them I'd destroyed my own workshop to collect on client contracts. He did this 4 hours after leaving my property on New Year's Eve. 4 hours after the cameras had recorded him forcing the side window and moving through my workbenches with the kind of focus he'd never once applied to any job he'd held. The same day, and within 72 hours of the break-in, Harold filed an emergency petition for guardianship of Maeve. The filing described my workshop as an industrial environment unsuitable for a child her age. His written declaration stated that my unstable business situation posed a risk to Maeve's welfare. My father, the man who had never once visited my workshop, never asked about a single restoration, never acknowledged that I'd built something real, was now claiming in a court document that the place where I'd raised my daughter was too dangerous for her to live. The man whose wife had shoved my daughter to the floor was petitioning to take her from me. I sat at my kitchen table with the court papers Margaret had forwarded. It was late. Maeve was asleep upstairs. The house was dark except for the light above the stove. I read Harold's declaration twice. His language was careful, procedural. He hadn't written it in anger. He'd written it the way he did everything, deliberately, with the understanding that paperwork was a tool and people were problems to be managed. I set the papers down on the table. I didn't feel anger, not the hot kind. What I felt was something colder, cleaner. That was the moment the last hesitation left me. They could insult my work. They could take my money. They could dismiss 10 years of what I'd built as a hobby, but they could not touch my daughter and then try to take her from me. On January 4th, Margaret produced the unedited security footage with full timestamps to local law enforcement. Both the fraud accusation and the guardianship petition began collapsing within 24 hours. The footage was continuous and unedited. 4 cameras, every angle. Curtis entering through the forced window at 11:40 p.m. Curtis destroying client pieces systematically across 12 minutes. Deb entering from the driveway. Deb shoving Maeve to the floor at 11:52 p.m. Deb's mouth forming words the audio captured clearly. Curtis's fraud accusation didn't survive the morning. Harold's custody petition didn't survive the week, but I wasn't done. Not yet. On January 6th, I went back into the workshop to clear the splintered remains of Ruthie's writing desk. I wasn't looking for anything. I was documenting the damage for the client loss records. Photographs, measurements, condition notes, the same process I followed for every piece. methodical, routine. The hidden compartment had been exposed when Curtis broke the frame apart. The panel I'd noted during my original assessment 7 years ago, and again during the November disassembly, had cracked open along its seam. Inside, pressed flat against the interior panel, was a sealed envelope. I didn't open it in a rush. I sat down on a workshop stool. The barn was cold. The light through the windows was thin and gray. I could see my breath. The envelope contained a formally executed will, signed by Ruth Stratton, witnessed by 2 neighbors, notarized, dated 7 years ago, 4 years before the version the family had been operating under since Ruthie's death. I read it slowly. The will named one beneficiary for the entire $340,000 trust. Real property, proceeds of $218,000, and invested assets of $122,000. Me, Lenore Stratton, sole heir. The second page contained a clause I read 3 times. The language was precise, the way Ruthie was precise about everything that mattered to her. It stated that inheritance rights were to be revoked for any family member who willfully damages, destroys, or causes destruction of items from the grantor's personal furniture collection. Ruthie's writing desk, the Federal Period Secretary, from 1807, the piece Curtis had splintered across my workshop floor, was a documented piece of that collection. She knew. She may not have known exactly how or when, but she knew what her family was. She knew what they were capable of, and she'd built the protection into the document the way she'd built the compartment into the desk. Hidden, patient, waiting. I set the will on the workbench. I sat there for a long time, in the cold barn, looking at my grandmother's handwriting on the witness line where she'd guided the pen. Then I called Margaret. The days between January 6th and January 16th were the quietest of my life. Margaret retained Robert Ward, a certified handwriting examiner, to authenticate the signatures and the notarial seal. She brought in a probate specialist. The will was verified, the signatures confirmed, the notarization valid. The contested version the family had been using, the one executed approximately 3 years ago, near the time of Ruthie's death, was reviewed and found to contain irregularities in witness signature dating that Margaret identified during comparison. I didn't call Harold. I didn't call Curtis. I didn't call Deb. I went to the workshop every morning. I began repairs on the pieces that could be saved. I made calls to clients whose pieces couldn't. Dorothy Allen drove out on January 10th. She looked at the remains of her cherry sideboard for a long time. She didn't say anything dramatic. She's not a dramatic woman. "I'll write a statement," she said. "Whatever you need." Her written submission, filed through Margaret, confirmed the sideboard's pre-restoration value at $8,400 and its total loss. On January 16th, I stood at the workshop window looking at the new snow on the driveway. The light was flat and white. My phone was in my hand. Margaret answered on the second ring. "File it," I said. 2 words, spoken evenly, no tremor, no hesitation. Margaret filed the authenticated will with the surrogate's court that afternoon. Simultaneously, the criminal evidence package, the security footage, the timestamps, the client damage documentation was submitted formally through law enforcement. Every piece of paper I'd kept for 10 years, intake sheets, repair logs, client contracts, invoices, became part of the record. $340,000 in trust assets. Sole beneficiary, Lenore Stratton. The revocation clause activated by documented destruction of a piece from the grantor's personal collection. Captured on 4 security cameras with timestamps. Harold's $204,000 claim. Gone. Curtis's $136,000 claim. Gone. Margaret called back at 4:47 p.m. to confirm the filing was complete. I listened. I said, "Thank you." I set the phone on the workbench. Then I went back to the piece I was sanding. White oak, a replacement panel for a client's dining table. The grain was straight and clean under my hands. If you've ever watched someone dismiss everything you built and then act surprised when you stop building it for them, hit that like button and subscribe. Harold learned about the probate filing through his own attorney on January 17th. Curtis learned within the hour. The phone bombardment began at 6:22 p.m. Curtis, missed call, 6:22. Curtis, missed call, 6:24. Curtis, missed call, 6:31. Harold, missed call, 6:38. Harold, missed call, 6:45. Deb, missed call, 6:51. Curtis, missed call, 7 o'clock. I let every one of them go to voicemail. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. The screen kept lighting up over and over. At 7 p.m., I turned off the ringer. Maeve was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up at the dark phone and then at me. "Is it them?" she asked. "Yes." She went back to her math worksheet. She didn't ask anything else. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I deleted them the next morning without playing them. All 7. January 18th passed in silence. I worked. Maeve went to school. The phone stayed on silent. Notifications piled up. Texts I didn't read, calls I didn't return. On January 19th, the doorbell rang at the workshop at 4:15 in the afternoon. I was finishing a coat of tongue oil on a table leaf. Maeve was upstairs doing homework. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and walked to the door. Curtis stood on the step, shirt untucked, eyes red-rimmed, 2 days of stubble that didn't look like fashion. It looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping. He didn't look like someone who drove a leased Audi anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, a 33-year-old man who had never once built anything that could hold his own weight. I kept my hand on the door frame. I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. "Lenore." His voice was hoarse. "We need to talk about this." "No." "The will? Where did this even come from? How did you—" "Nobody knew about this. Nobody knew she—" "I was restoring her desk. I do the work, Curtis. That's how I found it." His jaw worked. He looked past me into the workshop, at the workbenches where the damage still showed, at the space where his handiwork was still visible in gouged wood and missing pieces. The claws, the furniture claws. "You have to understand, we didn't know about that. Nobody knew she put that in there. You can't hold us to a document we didn't know existed." I didn't respond to it. I stood in the doorway and I waited. He shifted from confusion to something harder. "We'll contest it. Dad's already talked to his attorney. We'll tie this up for years, Lenore. You know that." I said nothing. You're doing this over furniture? Over a break-in? This is insane. He stopped. His voice cracked. Not from anger. The anger was leaving his face like color draining from raw wood left in the sun. What was underneath was something I'd never seen on Curtis before. Fear. "Can we just talk?" His voice dropped. Quieter now, almost a whisper. "Please, can we just sit down and talk about this? Like family?" I looked at him for a long moment, not unkindly. I looked at my younger brother standing on the doorstep of a workshop he'd destroyed 3 weeks ago, asking me to talk like family, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. "No." His eyes went wet. He blinked hard. He stood there for another few seconds, and I watched the last negotiating position leave his body the way air leaves a bellows when you lay it down. Then it turned, the way it always turns with Curtis. "Fine. You want to do it this way? That's on you. Dad was right about you. You were always—" He stopped himself. Or maybe he just ran out of words. "Goodbye, Curtis." I closed the door. Softly. No slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I stood in the workshop with my hand still on the door for 10 seconds. Then I turned off the porch light. I walked back to the table leaf and picked up my brush. The tongue oil was still wet. The grain accepted it evenly. I kept working. The weeks that followed were the quietest my house had been in 6 years. Not the heavy kind of quiet, the kind where you're waiting for the phone to ring or the next demand to arrive in your inbox on the 1st of the month. This was different. This was the kind of quiet where you realize the weight you've been carrying wasn't yours to begin with. I blocked every number. Curtis, Harold, Deb. I removed myself from the family group chat that Deb had maintained for years. The one where she posted photos of Sunday dinners I was never warmly invited to and holiday tablescapes arranged for people who didn't include my daughter in the head count. I deleted their contact cards. I didn't do it in anger. I did it the way I strip old finish from a damaged panel. Deliberately, evenly, one pass at a time until the surface is clean. The $1,350 that had gone to Curtis on the 1st of every month for 6 years, 72 payments, $97,200 in total, stopped on January 1st. I didn't send a notice. I didn't write an email explaining why. On February 1st, I transferred $1,350 into Maeve's education account instead. I did the same on March 1st, and every first of the month after that. Nobody called to schedule the monthly family dinner in February, or March, or April. They just stopped. No formal announcement, no dramatic final gathering. The tradition ended the way most traditions end when the person holding them together lets go, silently and without anyone admitting who'd been doing the holding. Margaret Collins handled the rest. She is not a woman who needs to be managed or reminded. The probate contest Harold filed through his own attorney lasted 7 weeks. Margaret defeated it methodically the way she does everything, with documentation, with timeline, with the irregularities she'd identified in the witness signature, dating on the contested version of the will. Harold's attorney withdrew the challenge in March. His legal fees for the failed contest came to approximately $14,000. Money he'd spent trying to hold on to $204,000 that was never his. The criminal charges moved through the system on their own schedule. Curtis was charged with felony property destruction and breaking and entering. Deb was charged with misdemeanor assault. I didn't follow the proceedings. I didn't need to. What I knew, I learned the way you learn things in a small community in the Finger Lakes. Through mutual contacts, through public records, through the quiet circulation of facts that don't need anyone to push them along. Curtis's employer terminated him when the felony charges became public. His contract included background check language, standard for anyone managing client accounts, and a pending felony for property destruction didn't survive the review. The job that had produced all those LinkedIn titles, regional account executive, territory development lead, strategic client liaison, ended without ceremony. Background checks at other companies revealed the same charges. Applications went nowhere. The restitution order was issued in March, $31,000 in confirmed client damages. Court ordered the same amount, down to the dollar, as the destruction he'd caused. Every figure documented, every intake sheet filed, every repair log preserved. Curtis returned the leased Audi to the dealership and absorbed the early termination penalty. By April, he'd moved out of the 2-bedroom apartment in Rochester. The gym membership, the meal kit subscriptions, the rotating lifestyle that $1,350 a month of my money had quietly subsidized, and into a studio apartment in a suburb I'd never been to and would never visit. By August, he was working night shifts at a regional distribution warehouse, the kind of job that doesn't have a LinkedIn title. Deb received a conditional discharge on the assault charge, 12 months of good behavior, no jail time, but the record exists. It will always exist. My mother shoved my 9-year-old daughter to a concrete floor, and there is a court document that says so in language that cannot be smoothed over or reframed as a misunderstanding. Harold lost everything he'd positioned himself to take. The revocation clause in Ruthie's authenticated will, the clause about willful damage to items from the grantor's personal furniture collection, removed his $204,000 claim entirely, not reduced, removed. The piece Curtis destroyed was a documented part of that collection, a Federal Period secretary desk, approximately 1807, that Ruthie had brought to my workshop herself, the desk she'd trusted to me, the desk that held the truth she'd hidden for anyone patient enough to do the work. Harold's emergency custody petition was dismissed with prejudice. The judge's written dismissal noted that the security footage directly contradicted every claim in the petition. The man who described my workshop as an industrial environment unsuitable for a child had filed that petition 3 days after his wife was recorded on 4 cameras shoving that child to the floor inside that same workshop. His own attorney's fees for the failed probate contest. His own credibility spent. His own son facing felony charges and a restitution order. His own wife with an assault record. I heard through a mutual contact that Harold started driving for a rideshare company in the evenings. 67 years old, retired, and driving strangers around in a car that wasn't leased. The man who had sat me down at the kitchen table 6 years ago and told me that family helps family, that it was my obligation to fund Curtis's professional development, was now working service economy hours to cover legal fees he'd generated by trying to take my daughter. I didn't seek that information out. It arrived the way weather arrives. I noted it, and I moved on. The family dinner stopped entirely. The group chat went silent. The Christmas card list, Deb's annual production, the one that proved the family was functional, didn't circulate that year. I don't know if there was a conversation among them about what happened. I don't know if Harold sat Curtis down and said the words I never heard from any of them. I don't know if Deb acknowledged what she did to Maeve. I don't know, and I don't need to know. I stopped needing things from them the night I turned off the ringer and went back to my workbench. The $340,000 trust was distributed by October. Margaret handled the paperwork. I signed where she indicated. I read every page because I read every page of everything. Invoices, contracts, repair logs, wills hidden in antique desks. That's who I am. That's who Ruthie knew I was. I used $68,000 of the distribution to purchase the barn property I'd been leasing for 9 years. The building where I'd built Stratton Workshop from nothing. The converted barn with the workbenches I'd framed myself. The light I'd hung. The door frame I'd planned by hand while Ruthie ran her fingers along the grain and said, "You have the hands for this?" It was mine now, not rented, not conditional, not dependent on a lease or a landlord or a family that had never once set foot inside it to see what I'd built. Mine. I installed a second set of workbenches in November. Maeve helped sand and stain them on a Saturday, working beside me with a sanding block, learning the direction of the grain the way I'd learned it, through her hands. She was careful and patient, and she didn't rush. When we finished, she stood back and looked at what we'd built together and said it smelled like the workshop was supposed to smell. That was the best Saturday of the year. Maeve made the honor roll in the spring. She joined a ceramics class at the Community Arts Center on Thursday afternoons. She has a best friend named Josie who lives 3 houses down and thinks the workshop smells interesting. Maeve laughs more now. She sleeps through the night. She doesn't flinch when the side door of the workshop rattles in the wind anymore. 1 year later, Christmas morning, the workshop's living quarters, the rooms above the barn where Maeve and I have lived and worked and rebuilt everything that mattered. A 1920s oak rocking chair sits in the corner of our living room. It was the first piece Lenore and Maeve restored together after the break-in. We sanded it by hand over 3 quiet weekends. No rush, no deadline, no client waiting. Just the 2 of us, working the grain smooth, replacing a cracked spindle, applying finish in thin, even coats, and waiting for each one to cure before starting the next. Maeve is curled in that chair on Christmas morning, reading. The light through the window is good, winter light, clean and sharp across the floorboards. The house is quiet in the way that quiet is supposed to feel. Not absence, presence, the presence of everything that belongs here and nothing that doesn't. I set down my coffee. Still warm. I look at the chair, at the grain we uncovered together, at the joints we tightened, at the finish that glows the way old oak glows when it's been cared for properly. Maeve looks up from her book. She runs her hand along the arm of the chair, the way I've seen her do 100 times. Feeling the wood, feeling the work. "I'm glad we fixed this one ourselves," she says. "Me too." I don't say anything else. I don't need to. I don't think about the writing desk. I don't think about Curtis or Harold or Deb or the $97,200. I don't think about the police reports filed against me or the custody petition or the voicemails I deleted without listening. I don't think about the leased Audi or the studio apartment or the warehouse night shifts or the rideshare routes or the conditional discharge. I think about the chair. I think about my daughter's hands on the wood. I think about Ruthie, who saw what I was before anyone else bothered to look and who built a hidden compartment to make sure it mattered. This is what a workshop is for. You take what's broken, you study it, you understand what went wrong and where the joints failed, and then you decide, with clear eyes and steady hands, what's worth restoring and what isn't. Some things can't be saved. Some things shouldn't be. The cut was clean. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children, knowing your worth, and the people who see us before the rest of the world catches up, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.